basically the background to this talk is that I don't like to see software projects fail. I want to ask you a question. Have you ever felt that regardless of your contribution to a project, you haven't been able to control the outcome of it? People and software are complex. By doing this talk, I hope to inspire you to achieve greater success in your projects. Let's make Agile great again.
Trump fan.
Yeah, it's actually not Trump, it's Ronald Reagan. So, a little bit about me. I didn't have any good picture to find, so I took a cool picture. This is me on the water in Brisbane. It's a ship in the background and me ascending after a nice time. So I'm a software engineer. I've worked for about 15 years. Why is that important? Well, I've been in a lot of projects at a lot of clients. That's pretty much what it says. I worked as a team manager, team lead, project manager, architect, developer. All agile titles? Not really. So that will continue. We'll get back to that topic and touch a little bit about the problems with terminology. I was born and raised in Sweden. My mother is German, my father is Italian, giving me a bit of passion and a bit of structure. I migrated to Australia 2017, late December. Landed in Melbourne. My interests are scuba diving. I like cats, and I'm a libertarian, which means I do not really like governance. So, anyone know anything about Sweden? You probably use Spotify. So this is the New York Stock Exchange, and either they are really ignorant or really, really funny. So we know we actually have a person from this country in attendance. So Sweden is not Switzerland. They're both neutral countries, but they are quite different in shape and size and location as well. Sweden is the blue one up north. Switzerland is the one in the Alps in the middle. Sweden has quite a big tech sector for being such a small country. You might recognize some of these brands. Some of them you might use on a daily basis, such as the Pirate Bay. And Adam was on me about Skype being Estonian. Well, it's built by 2 Estonians, but it's a Swedish person behind it. And we also have a history of industry. Some of them you recognize, probably IKEA, H&M, Volvo. Fjällräven is, you see those backpacks that all the Asians have, the square ones? That's spreading like a virus all over the world. Hasselblad, of course, is the first camera on the moon. Koenigsegg, Adam, do you know what that is?
I have no idea what it is.
It's a car. Yes. Yes, so it's famous from Need for Speed. SKF, they create ball bearings. From that, Volvo spawned. So it's 2 Gothenburg-based companies, where I'm from. Tetra Pak, packaging. So, do you know Axel Nobel, Adam?
Alfred Nobel, yes.
Yes.
Nobel Prize.
So that's one of a remnant company from one of his companies. So the Nobel Prize is a Swedish thing. And then, of course, Electrolux, one of the biggest industry companies doing dishwashers and other...
Vacuum cleaners.
Yeah. I never had one, so I don't know. But so it's just to showcase that even though Sweden is quite small, we're quite big in tech and industry. The presentation will be in 3 parts. So we start looking into success. In order to say that projects are not successful, we need to define success. Then we'll look into some Agile Anti-patterns, and you're probably going to recognize some of them, or all of them. and we're going to try to find some remedies to them. And then I would like to have a retrospective and get some feedback on the presentation so we can get better, or at least I can get better. So, who of you are doing Agile?
Agile.
And how many projects do you think of that you consider successful? Anyone want to disclose a number? Percentage or absolute number? None.
Your whole career?
No, just Agile. Something that's been called Agile.
Yeah. So
Something's been marketed as Agile.
I've asked this question to a lot of people, and we usually agree around 10%, maybe. So every one out of 3 projects are considered unsuccessful, according to the State of Scrum report, which the Agile Alliance conduct.
Do you happen to know what the percentage is for all software projects?
No, I do not. So this, I started looking into No Project, the No Project movement, which is a reaction to the Agile movement. And they stated that the failure rate is consistent. So I started looking into where did they get that from. And I found this report. And I looked at the 2015 report, and the success rate was 62%. Then 2016-17, it was 63%. So they're quite consistent in failure, and adoption rate is quite high. So that means we continue failing. Unfortunate. So, what is success? How would you define a successful project? Any metrics?
Delivery of business benefit.
Yep.
It solves the problem that it was built to solve.
Yeah.
John, I'd say getting it into production, shipping the code and getting it used.
Yep. So the usual suspects: on time, on budget, on features, which we're starting to touch, on value, happy client, happy team, low technical debt, few or no defects, easy to change and maintain. So the purpose of this list is to start with the common ones and then trickle down to a few that you might not hear every day. So do you think the definition of success will change depending on who's observing the project? So it's quite hard to say if it's successful or not, because depending on how we look at it, it could be successful or not. So one example could be, we deliver on time, we deliver on budget, but the dev team they are so fed up they will just quit because they've been pushed too hard. Or the dev team is really happy because we tried something new, something cool, but the budget completely gone, and the client is not really happy. But we created a great solution that we're really happy with. So depending on who, success or unsuccess is relevant. So who are the actors? Do you want? Yeah. So this is just a couple of stereotypes which I have created to show that we have different actors involved in a project. So we have the stakeholder, the account manager, and the development team. The stakeholder is the guy with the money, the guy with a plan, the guy with a vision, usually represented by a proxy. So for instance, like a middle manager They have a vision. In order to realize that vision, they need to go to a board and ask for money. And of course, the board will push back and say, what do we get for that money? You will get all these fancy things. And they will say, when do we get those things? Then we have the account manager grabbing that bag of money. Their motivator is building a long-lasting and good relationship with the stakeholder. And also their budget. Then we have the dev team spending the money. So here the motivation might be different. We might want to try new technology to solve new problems or learn new stuff. We are quite reluctant to interact with the other two actors. It's not our comfort zone, historically. And maybe we see that a deadline is just stressing us. We don't really want to touch that subject. So I believe that in order to make projects more successful or software development more successful, we need to collaborate more and we need to help each other and we need to be more successful and find great success together. So let's start looking into some of the malpractices in fragile development. Work in software is the primary measure of progress. As is from the Agile Manifesto. It's the best way of showing value, delivering. So, the no project movement is about that the project itself can be an anti-pattern. And I will tell you more about that in a bit. First, we're going to look at why we have the problem with the stakeholder. So imagine yourself going to a car dealer, looking at all the cars, just imagining yourself sitting in it, driving in it, hearing the engine. Then you look at the price tag and you see 100,000. And you look at the car. This is what I'm getting for that price. Tangible, easy to understand. Imagine yourself in a boardroom with a guy saying 100,000, and you might get some software. And you say, what am I getting? Well, we're agile, so we don't really know. You will get stuff. I said, no, I want to know what I'm getting. Then you get deliverables. So you will have functions. That will create the agile waterfall. Because you will have a number of deliverables scoping out the project. So we say, I want these 10 items. And I will pay you 100,000 for those. That creates the sprint train. So every deliverable might end up as a sprint. And you will deliver an increment of the project instead of an increment of a function. This creates the limitation on Agile, which defeats the purpose of the methodology. Then we can get the overloaded sprints. So a little story that from a planning session, and we said that, oh, this item is too big. It's probably 4 weeks. He said, no. Put another number on it. I said, but it's 4 weeks. No, put another number on it. Okay, 8. And we had the review, and they say, why are you not delivering anything? We will deliver in a couple of sprints. Because you keep pushing stuff from one sprint to the another. And then it's not really agile. So what do we do about this? I think the first one, we need to involve the stakeholders. We need to teach them what we're doing, to show them what we're doing, to help them understand. We can use real-world analogies. I usually use cars because it's easy to understand. If you have a car, it has to go into service and you might fix stuff on the inside, which you will never see on the outside. It's the same with software. You might have to, redo the engine or like have a system going to service, we can help them understand what we are doing. We can try to involve them in planning, in reviews, but I think the most valuable thing is to show them value. The planning is the most important thing we can do. And that ties into the next two items, which are no projects and no estimates. So these kind of connect, so I'll just show them. So what are the problems with a project? And this is, you can also consider a sprint a mini project, because you have a start, you have a finish. And that's the same with a project. So what happens in a sprint? You will put the most valuable things into it, then you might have some time left. You find something that you just put in there. Something with lower value, but it fits, so let's put it in. That means that we have a value mismatch. So the most valuable thing, the second most valuable thing might be done in next sprint. And what happens then if we have overloaded the sprint? We push it forward. The important stuff that we kind of plan to do the next sprint gets pushed even further forward. So then we have the project working against us. When we get to the delivery phase and we're not done, we get stressed. We start skipping testing, we start skipping documentation, we start skipping all these practices that makes the code maintainable, deliverable. So again, we have the project working against us. Then we have the overhead with the whole process. We need management, we need all these things around it. And also when you bite off bigger chunks of work, you increase the risk. So the proposal with no projects is basically reducing it to Kanban in its essence. But the big thing with it is to deploy this on an organizational level. Because the Scrum team or the dev team has always been agile, more or less. But it's the organization that is not agile. They are stuck in the old thinking. Money equals a function or a project. So, how can we help them? If we deliver often, they will start seeing that they get something for the money. They will start leaving us alone because they feel that stuff is happening. How can we do this? One thing I came up with was, maybe you can have a terminal close to where the board people go for coffee or something, and you will say, put a Scrum board over it, and you'll say, new cool stuff, try it out. They can start playing with the system and give feedback. And they start seeing things are happening. I worked in an organization where the senior stakeholders, they didn't attend the planning meetings because they felt they never got anything through. So they stopped being involved. That's why it was, because everything took so long. So if we start breaking it down, and I think the recommended way is to get it to 2 days worth of work. This is a hard thing to do, and it takes time. So that's the planning. You need to spend more time on planning. What happens if we can break it down into 2 days increments? The risk becomes much lower. So if you deliver something that is wrong in 2 days, you can get feedback and you can fix it. If you, for instance, do a 2-week sprint and you get feedback after 2 weeks, then you lost many days to change it. And you might lose opportunities by doing so. One other thing we can do is start quantifying the value. And by doing so, we can also look at the value in a sense that if we do this today, the value is 5, for instance. If we do it in 2 months, it's still 5. And then we have another item. If we do this today, it's 5. If we do it tomorrow, it's 4. So one can be yeah, you get the picture. If we see that the value decreases with time, we can prioritize. They might have to do them earlier than the one that has this constant value, regardless of how long we push it forward. Because everything needs to be done directly. If we can say the value is the same in 5 months as today, do it in 5 months. One tricky thing is, how do we quantify stuff? That is not easy, and it requires a lot of effort. Something called sensitivity analysis. You will create a model on how you generate revenue. So for instance, if you have Amazon, they might see how many people will be on the site, how many converting, how big is the purchase, and so on and so forth. And you could actually put a money value on it. So you could go back to the organization and say, if we do this item, it will result in this amount of money for you, which is powerful, because then we're talking the same language. But of course, someone needs to do all this, and we'll get back to that as well. But to summarize this, deliver early, deliver often, and get feedback and refine. And Scrum is about, or Agile is about, increments and iterations. And it's increments of the function and not the product. So don't chunk it up and think that you've delivered a part of it. It's a part of no project to consider each delivery as a potential termination point of the project, because you have delivered something with value that can be used. And if the customer or client or stakeholder decides, I'm good with this, I'm done, then we finish. I want to touch on the evidence-based scheduling. So that is from Joel Spolsky. If anyone don't know him, is this Stack Overflow guy, and he also created Trello. Very good read. So what is evidence-based scheduling? So this is a way of building confidence in giving organizations a date when we deliver. It's quite complex, and it's something we can just look into to see if we can use as a tool if we're in that situation that someone pressures us with a date. When can we get this? Well, what he proposes is that you actually measure the time it takes to produce an item, and that is all time. So if you have breaks or meetings, include that. Then you measure it against the estimate, and then you do that for X amount of items, and then you see the difference. And on those differences, you will run simulations, and from that you will get an outcome. And from that, you can predict delivery dates. Again, someone needs to do this. Yeah, we touched on the feedback, but I think that's a really powerful thing that we might miss, is actually talking with the stakeholders, showing them what we're doing, explaining how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and getting their feedback, and then adapting. Yes?
I'm just trying to understand. I think that you're saying that you like the idea of delivering features and getting feedback.
Yes.
Isn't that essentially what you're doing by having PBIs in a sprint and doing a sprint review and getting feedback from the product owner and stakeholders at that time?
It's about how big you want the increment to be. So a sprint being 1 to 4 weeks.
Usually they're 2 in most companies.
Yeah. So 2 weeks. You will increase risk in 2 weeks. If you
Nothing's stopping you from finishing a PBI and walking up to a product owner and say, give me feedback on that. is that done?
The thing that stops us is that you will probably be overloaded, needing to move on to the next item, and you think that we'll do all that in the review instead of taking the time to deliver one thing.
So if you would be overloaded during a sprint to do that, what is the difference if you're following your no projects?
You focus on one thing at a time. It's the Kanban approach. You could call it a Scrum swarm also if you want
small
to.
Scrum, but how do you get the feedback from the product owner? Product owner is busy.
We're gonna touch the product owner in a bit.
I assume that a lot of the motivation of the talk is the product owner. Am I right? You're thinking of the product owner, or are you thinking of the Scrum Master or the dev team?
From this perspective is the organization, so that's also the product owner. But yeah, no, of course. But something is not working properly with the sprints, and I think it's a lot of overhead in the sprint. A lot of things that we do too much to deliver one sprint. So if we narrow it down to one small increment, you don't need feedback on exactly everything either at that exact time. But I don't have a better answer to that question.
I know it's a difficult problem. Do you have any thoughts on the idea of, you've obviously seen many of the teams at SSW using done videos. Does that solve much with getting feedback?
Not sure. For me personally, no, but I guess there's a reason why we do it.
So, John, with your example earlier, you've got the stakeholder and then the account manager and then the developer.
Yep.
So in that situation, do you want to always be in touch with the stakeholder and sort of bypass the account manager? Would that be an ideal scenario for you to get your feedback from the stakeholder rather than proxying through the account manager?
So the account manager, for me, is not really in the delivery phase. The account manager is kind of a facilitator between.
Yeah, so
it's more of
get the project started, or the no project started.
Getting to a point where there actually is a project.
Okay.
Like, it's not, for me, they don't have to be involved. They should trust the organization to be able to deliver it. It's more of a networking role.
Obviously, you can't get a project up and running without an account manager easily. And you kind of sometimes, some product owners and stakeholders aren't comfortable whinging to the people doing the work. So their outlet is to whinge to someone indirect, like the account manager, who then can deliver the message back.
Why are they not comfortable with that?
Some humans don't like saying mean things to the person directly. They like whinging about it indirectly. It's kind of common.
Interesting.
So I just wanted to add some of that. Actually, maybe part of the planning to remedy these issues could be to set up the actual communication channels. What everyone in that situation will be comfortable doing. Some people would prefer talking to the account manager or prefer talking to the stakeholders. So that could be one of the remedies to set up the proper communication that everyone agrees will work.
Exercise you could do in that is the trust exercise. Like, usually you go in a room and you say, how comfortable are you talking freely in this forum? And you will write a number on a note and you will see if someone is uncomfortable or not, and you can act accordingly. But with that, the communications path, I will address that in a later slide. So one role we haven't mentioned here, so that I believe should handle this.
Sorry, John, could I just touch on the last comment I just made about the account managers? Obviously, in a Scrum environment, the retrospective is the best place to inspect and adapt. You get the right people to bring up what the issues are, and you kind of fix the best one. In some circumstances, the account manager is quite good at preparing people to bring up the right issues in the right way, and there's less surprises. Like sometimes an issue comes up as a bit of a surprise or not handled empathetically, the retrospective can go not as well as it should, and so sometimes that's kind of handy.
So another, just hammering in the messages from the manifesto. So deliver early and continuously and valuable. So we have the agile bullshitting, and I guess you all have been, what is this then? Yeah, everyone is agile, but everyone agrees it's not working. Why is it not working? Maybe because we're not using the tools. So you go to a company and say we're agile, and you ask them what do you actually do then, and it boils down to a prioritized list. And then, so I'm going to tell you a little story about a situation I ended up in. So a sales manager told me, so the client, they want a project manager, but I told them, that's going to be too expensive. You don't need that. I'm just going to pop in, I'll do the ceremonies and pop out, and I'll lower your cost. I said, yeah, fantastic. Sounds like a real improvement. Then we have the misuse of the label. So this is also an example that I've been confronted with. We had a workshop. We came back and said, well, instead of doing one screen, we'll be doing 7. And I asked, so obviously the scope changed, so how did the budget change? It didn't. But that's what being agile is. You have to adapt. Yeah, I tried to adapt to it as good as I could. But then you have well, I'm a certified Scrum Master, I understand this. Yeah. Imagine fixing your car. You have a guy, I'm certified, and you ask them, how many cars have you fixed? 0, but I'm certified. And then you have another guy, I fix hundreds of those, I've seen all of it. Who would you choose? He has no certification, the other guy, by the way. I would go with the one with the experience. How can we fix this? If you're going to say you're doing Agile, please do it. Otherwise, don't even say you're doing it, because that's a waste of money. The popping in and doing the ceremonies is probably good, doing the ceremonies, but it's not the actual meeting. So imagine being in a planning session. You're trying to get people engaged. You see that they're drifting, looking at their watches, pulling up their phones. So what's going on? You're not providing value to them. So we need someone that actually works on providing values in these ceremonies. So if you have a planning session, prepare that planning session. Spend 80% of the time refining 20% of the backlog, because if you do the whole thing, it will take a lot of time and you might scratch a lot of things and you worked on it for no reason. So make sure the items with the highest value are good enough to go into a planning session. Then you have more engaged people in the meeting, it will be more efficient and happier people. Certification is good. According to the State of Scrum, a lot of people are happy with the certifications. I would say use it as a complement to your experience. Don't rely on just being certified will give you the experience to run this process. And then we have the mismatch in terminology. So during the Brisbane user group, I talked to a person who presented himself as a Scrum Master, but then also as a project manager. And why was that? I asked him. He said, well, towards the team, I'm the Scrum Master, but towards the organization, I'm the project manager. In order to get Scrum or Agile to work, we need to force the organization to adopt the terminology. Otherwise, we'll keep thinking about the old ways of doing things, and we will never push through this. Now we're getting closer to the product owner. The business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. This is what I call all hands on deck. This is a usual thing. When I applied for team lead roles, the first question is, are you hands-on? And I go, but what do you mean? And they say, well, it's a bit management, but it's mostly development. I say, so what's the ratio? Well, we're thinking 10% management and then 90% hands-on. I asked them, so daily Scrum, that removes half of the management time for me. What do you want me to do in those 2 hours that's left? They go, what do you mean? But that's the actual time you want me to spend on this process. So what's the first thing we do wrong? We'll remove the Scrum Master because we feel it's not needed. It might be true if you have a skilled team with experienced developers, they will share the responsibility and you might not need the Scrum Master as much. But the thing is, you don't need the Scrum Master for the team. You need a Scrum Master for the product owner and the organization. Because that's where the big problem lies. So the Scrum Master coaches the product owner and also helps the organization with the adoption. And this is what goes on in between those ceremonies that we think we can just pop in and out of. So this is where I feel many projects or products or companies have failed. And I think Will has a real-life experience of this to actually get it working.
Yes, so I worked in an organization that went through a full transformation over nearly 3 years. And we had great success when we actually did exactly what you said, by separating the Scrum Master from the project manager and getting the whole business and even our customers to adapt or adopt our new practices. And we managed to go from 6 monthly to 2 monthly to nearly daily releases, and delivering value every day. It was a hard process, but the payoff was enormous.
Yeah, and it took you in time.
It took us close to 3 years for that change, but it was really good.
So it's a long and painful process, but in the end it's worth it if we do it the right way. Yep.
There's a bunch of comments online, and one of them is kind of around the idea of how do you feel about the way that Microsoft uses Scrum and that their definition of done means that they deploy it to production. So when you're doing each sprint review, you're actually just reviewing all the stuff that's gone into production. Does that change your stance at all on any of this?
No. That's good. If you understood the requirements, I see no issue not going to production. If it's a small increment and it's wrong, then it's an easy fix. If you work a long time in the project and then release it and it's completely wrong, then you have a big issue in production. If it's a small thing, like if a button is green instead of red, you can fix it.
Are you saying that once, if you are doing it the way Microsoft do it, you would be happy?
You can do it like A/B. You can A/B test it. You can put it in production to a small group of users or targeted group of users. There are various ways of working around any issue there. I mean, the feedback. If you get the feedback in production, as long as you haven't done it the way where value goes away, there's no issue getting feedback in that environment.
If you had have been on all your projects ran the way that the Microsoft example that he's asking about online is, all the projects you were doing were delivering multiple PBIs during the sprint into production, and the sprint reviews is just reviewing production, does that resolve a lot of the issues that you're saying that you don't enjoy?
It could. I mean, if you had a old and slow UAT process where you get stuck, that way will reduce the friction. But this is more with the confidence you have in the quality of your deployment as well.
So I'm kind of leading on. Does that mean that DevOps is a big solution to the pain you've experienced?
Yes. 100%. The no ownership. So this is my new no something missing. So the no ownership is what Adam touched. The availability of a product owner. So often the product owner gets assigned and it's a side chore. It's a person that already has a lot of work, and now they also get to be asked a lot of questions from a dev team. I would say we need to help the organization understand the importance of a good product owner being there, being able to answer questions. That keeps up pace. It can be a proxy as long as the person is available and can answer questions, so we get the value that we try to build. So, worked on a project where we didn't have a Scrum Master. We didn't deliver anything. We got the Scrum Master. He helped us break down items into viable work packages, helped us starting to deliver, started getting feedback. Then I asked the product owner, do you feel it works better now? Well, yeah, probably. Remember you felt that we didn't deliver before? And I said, yeah. Do you feel we deliver now? Yes. Do you feel it has something to do with the Scrum Master? Yeah, but you know the cost of having a Scrum Master. And I told him, is it really a cost? Or is it an investment? By having the Scrum Master, we were able to start delivering and get functions out, which means opportunity, lower risk. So stop seeing the Scrum Master as the hands-on person delivering. And there's no issue pulling your best developer into a Scrum Master role. If he or she stops delivering, that person will make the other in the team deliver at their full capacity or close to it. So you might end up with more capacity and you might end up with better mentorship. I know several people who had these divided roles who took a step down and said, I'm not delivering value. I've been in that position, trying to be the leader, trying to be the senior dev. It's very hard, and either will fail. So don't be afraid to try to pull one person out of the hands-on position. There are other stuff. They can mentor, they can do the product owner coaching, the organizational coaching, metrics, which we haven't really touched. Someone needs to measure the correct metrics, follow up. Do we provide the value we're saying? What we usually measure is velocity, but there are so many other things that could be interesting. They can help with all these things surrounding calculating the actual return on investments. They can help with showing the organization, the product, all of these things that we probably need to do to get the organization to adopt Scrum, but we are not doing, and that's why Scrum is failing, or Agile. And then the product owner. I think that, as long as they are available and as long as they are the right person to answer a question, that's fine. But when you ask someone and they say, ask me another day, or I cannot answer that, then we get the bottleneck. Then we need to push back and say, we need another person. And we need to start showing them what the cost is not having that person. So then we can start showing them, we will be delayed. If we delayed these items, which we have a quantified value on, we can start showing them what it costs to delay us. And then again, we're talking their language, which helps us.
Okay, I got to make a comment on that one. Being a product owner of many products, it's always painful having a product owner who is unavailable. It can be debilitating, but having had the other experience where clients have a product owner who's too busy, and then they give us someone else to be the product owner who is someone that the product owner trusts. Sometimes it can be kind of their semi-PA type person who doesn't have complete authority to make decisions on certain things and says, I'll have to get back to you. I've found that the best thing is to have the best product owner and just keep working on that person to make sure that product owner is available for the sprint reviews, because you want that person in the end giving the feedback rather than the proxy product owner. And if you need feedback midway through the sprint, then there's always other stuff to do usually. You just have gentle persistence until you get that person and you get unblocked. But I don't think a good solution is getting a proxy product owner, essentially.
I'm not saying that the proxy will be a person who cannot make decisions. I'm saying that that proxy will have to have the same authority, but it could be a different person. More, if that person have better access to the product owner or such. It's our definition, what we need, that we need to push back with. So if we feel that the proxy is stalling the project, we need to say that and address that as an impediment.
I have a little test that I give clients when they want to give us a different product owner to solve a problem of unavailability. You ask them some hypothetical questions, such as, it's usually to do with money or resources. Do you think that Mary will now be able to, if we need to, just employ a Photoshop person for a few days, say $4,000 or $5,000 or something? Can Mary authorise that without speaking to you? I think the answer of that says volumes over whether that person is properly empowered to do the proper role and make the decisions that go forward.
Depends. If you can give you resources but you're doing the wrong things, then a resource is not really valuable. So it's actually both. you will have to be able to answer the domain-specific questions as well. But yeah, that will create a bottleneck if it's not actionable on a monetary question.
Yeah, well, obviously a proxy owner is never as good as the real product owner, but sometimes just making a decision one way or the other is the best way of just going and making nothing happen.
Yeah, and in that situation, well, risk increases again. If we do small increments and we get it wrong because of the product owner, the risk will be lower if it's a small increment and we can get it out fast. So now let's look into the team. This will be a lot of my personal opinion, so feel free to disagree, and maybe some of you will. The best architectures, requirements, and design emerge from self-organizing teams. So, how many have heard of the Spotify way? We create squads, tribes, clans, whatever. It's, from what I've heard from people I know who work there, might not be the reality. So, what can happen? Someone puts together a team of people they feel should be in that team. I worked at a product company. We had a big monolithic application. Going to go the microservices way and split it up into multiple products, creating new teams around these products. The CTO sat in his chamber, thought about all the fun and cool products we have, and then who will be working on them. Showed us team leads, this is my plan. And we said, well, we know these people and I don't think this is going to work. I'm certain this will work, was the answer. We tricked him into doing an exercise where we actually put up the proposed products and people got to stand under the one they want to work on. And what happened? Some of them were empty. And he started pulling people. Come on. You're supposed to stand here. I said, no, that's not the way it's going to work. Then we have the scenario when we go into planning and all the items are already assigned to people. You're doing this, you're doing that, and you're doing that. Strange. Have you been in such a situation? Yeah. So, what can we do about this? This is my personal belief. I have no scientific proof. It's just anecdotal. I believe that if we start forcing people working together, we create a lot of friction. People might not like each other, and then you start doing team building, spending money, sending people away. Learn to like each other and learn to work well together. We can do this another way. We can actually let people decide how they are working and with whom. So instead of focusing on who does what, focus on who works with who. So one example can be if you have a lot of boring stuff that needs to be done, you can either incentivize people or you can force them. Both creates problems. I got 2 movie tickets for doing this, now I want 4. Instead, if you have 2 people working well together, let them work together, let them work wherever they want to work, and I guarantee you, if there are boring stuff to be done, those 2 might pick that because they enjoy working together. They don't really care if it's the worst thing, but if you have people not working well together and on top of that you slap the most boring item on them, that is bound to create friction. So this is something we forget, because usually Scrum teams have been built with We need a tester, we need an architect, we need a back end, a front end, and then we just throw different people in and say, now work together. I know Adam and I are not in agreement here, but I think that a Scrum team should be able to deliver regardless if you have a tester or not. You should take full responsibility for your increment. And then you can have a QA strategy that will support the team. And that ties into the autonomy. Trust in the team, trust in people, give them guidance. You ready?
I have a couple of comments on this.
Yeah, sure.
I strongly believe developers can't test their own work. And I've had too many cases where developers can be okay testers of other people's work, but I haven't had great experiences with developers in general testing their own
Why is that?
work.
Why can't you test your own
Because
code?
you test code, you test UIs as you see them, as you know they're meant to be written, as you're intimate with them, and a fresh set of eyes is awesome. Always, always 4 eyes are better than 2 eyes.
But I believe that what's giving me a lot of benefits is to work together with a QA specialist and ask them, how will you test this function? How will you attack it? How will you try to make it fail? What scenarios do you see? And then I will develop for that. And I will make sure I run those scenarios. I believe that the explanation that is you shouldn't test your own things, have you really understood the requirements if you cannot test your own code?
One of the observations, I tend to agree developers don't test their own work particularly well, but you would hope that their acceptance criteria on whatever task you've been given is sufficient, that independent of what the developer thinks they're testing, they've got a fairly prescriptive list of what they can go through. Now, that then becomes the next challenge, is getting requirements pinned down to that kind of level, but that's, to me, where it sort of needs to head.
I think that one thing, speaking as a developer and doing some introspection, is that you want to deliver. You coded and coded and coded. And sometimes you don't even run your code, you just push it. So I would say if you cannot test your own code, there's nothing stating that you should be able to test someone else's code better. Then developers don't test at all. So I think that by doing too much, the test workload is big. We usually don't estimate the testing. We usually want to deliver. And then we skip testing and we have the lifeline. We have the tester. I know that I can just push it to the tester and he will find it. Just going to do, this is from Joel Spolsky when he worked at Microsoft. So one way they were pressed with time with Word. One way of delivering was that they created the bug. They knew that this is wrong. It's going to be caught by the QA department, but we need to deliver. So I just, for line height, it just did return 12. He can deliver, comes in as a bug instead. That's why I'm thinking that, yes, we can test our own code if we give ourselves the right, circumstances.
I'm inclined to agree with Adam simply because for the same reason that writers can't proofread their own writing or edit their own writing, the assumptions need to come from somewhere else. Otherwise the code and the test are coming from the same place, the same assumptions, and there's going to be a lot of bits missing.
That's based on that we get blinded by our own work, and it's because we only see probably the positive flow, and we only test that, and we're maybe not as experienced looking at a system, saying how can this go wrong. We'll only build for when it goes right, and I believe it's hard to figure out all these scenarios. And I know that some of the best testers I worked with are the domain experts, because they can create the end-to-end scenario that if I fix something over here, it will break over there. And if you're in a slice of the application, that would be hard to see. But maybe we can agree that we need to take more. So how would we do this then if we go to production, if we're not testing our own things?
Well, if you're talking about going to production, John, I definitely don't want testers testing their own stuff. The developers testing their own work. And I guess the best analogy I can use is how many times have you written an important email and you've proofread it and you press send and it's got a screw up in it. I can't tell you how many times I've said, I will do this, when I meant I will not do this. And I don't know how I missed the word not, because it's kind of important. And I've checked what I'm saying to, some emails are worth a lot of money, and I've checked what I'm saying, I've reread it, and I've still had a screw up. So I've got pretty used to asking someone next to me to read what I've just written.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You got used to it. You might screw up once, but if you get used to someone else saving you all the time, you get sloppy.
No, I honestly believe I get better from other people giving me feedback once I've done it. But I might read a comment from online who takes a different tact. He's saying most of the problems that I think he's kind of, I'm paraphrasing here, but I think he's talking a lot of the pain that you're encountering, good engineering practices need to be enforced, plus feature flags, plus deployment rings, blue-green deployments, TDD, BDD. What's three amigos? I don't know what three amigos are. Story kickoffs can help here as well.
Yep, I agree. And let's move on. So, just by doing Agile, you won't get great code. So, just by having a fancy project methodology won't mean that we fix all the coding issues, as that person states. We might still be building on technical debt. So that's the software craftsmanship. Don't forget about that. Use all the acronyms. Let's start another discussion. Unit tests. Is that the silver bullet? I believe not. I believe that there is a flaw with unit tests that we forget about, and it goes back to the technical debt. So one CTO asked him, so we have a critical production bug, and he said, it's impossible, we have 20,000 unit tests. And I said, yeah, but what does that really mean? He goes, it means we have no bugs. And I said, well, it means that we have a lot of code to maintain. It means that we have to prove that all these tests actually test something, because we still have critical production bugs, even if we have that many tests. So there's a cost of ownership doing all these tests. So my recommendation is unit test units of code. Do not unit test execution flows. There are better tests suitable for that. I would say automated acceptance tests or component tests are much more suitable to test on a higher level and go through the flow, and you can test your input and output. Unit test, very suitable if you exactly know what you're expecting and you can...
Sorry, I'm just not familiar with the component tests. Is that an end-to-end test?
So that's it's a discussion we had in a project. So the integration test is usually what called a component test, but the definition of a component is kind of arbitrary. It's what you decide. It's a part of the system which you decide. So it can be the whole thing, or it can be several components or units. But everyone thinks differently. I consider integration tests to actually test integrations, not integration between units. That for me is a component, but it's terminology. One thing that helped me a lot is peer reviews. And I'm gonna start another disagreement. I really don't like pull requests. Because, yeah, you can go, Will. Now, but it removes the conversation about code for me. So a pull request, kind of, you scan through the changes, but you don't know why the change is made, unless you have comments on every decision. So you will have to assume what the person has done. I think it's easier if you can do pull requests, but then you can sit together and you can discuss why you have done things. Because if you get to explain what you have done, first you can prove your own solution in your own head. Usually you go, oh shit, why did I do this? And then you just change it all right away. Or you can get feedback with someone. Yeah, I get what you did that, but there's a better way of doing it, and I will explain to you why. The benefit of a pull request would be that you get this documented, because you will actually add the comments. But I feel that if you have the possibility, please talk to each other, talk about code, talk about your solutions. It will increase quality. At least it has for me. And this one, help each other, teach each other, and give each other your experience. One thing that worked very well for me to reduce the technical debt is having a common way of developing. So we used the clean code architecture, which has been produced by some of our guys. So if I get thrown into a project, I recognize the code. So I can right away jump into it and start finding stuff. If you get that personal flavor on the code, what will happen? So the first developer comes into a project will go and say, oh, this is wrong, I will redo it. Redo it in his flavor, and then the next one comes, do the same thing. And actually was involved in a project where the team manager came to me and said, I have a problem. Everyone is redoing this function, but they're not producing any new functions. They're just redoing it their way. Then we started with these peer reviews. We started talking to each other. We started helping each other with the solutions, and we got to a baseline. Of course, you should have some autonomy. Everyone shouldn't be the same. Let's not kill creativity. But if we decide on a baseline, and from that, we can do our own touch on it, it will be more efficient, because otherwise, when you're going to look into someone's code, you will go, oh, what does this person think? What should this person have thought? And how am I going to fix it? If you have this common baseline, you can directly focus on the logic. And if it's done properly with solid or what not, you could actually, if you have a good name on a function and you have the requirement, you can just replace that function if it's not working the way it should. If it's thousands of lines, you need to figure out exactly where to go. Is it just a small unit failing? Remove it, fix it. And then you save a lot of time and effort, and we can deliver faster. So, to summarize, we all have to work together, but the dev team, we need to push back and help the organization to transition into a more agile thinking, because we are the one that are the agile people, and it won't work if it gets stopped as soon as you get outside the team. And the way we should do it is just start with these ideas, plant them, and get the ball rolling. I don't think we can do a revolution. We have to do a small grassroots movement and get this rolling. And eventually, in a couple of years, as Will said, we might succeed. So I hope I've been able to plant some seeds and give you some tips and pointers to start working on this. And yeah, automation, we touched that. Automate as much as you can. We had a discussion about, sorry that I should have seen this one, but we had a discussion about this in Melbourne, that, well, it would take time to set up all this automation. Not necessarily. Start small with this as well. Do a simple build. It can be an empty solution, just get the build up there, get the deploy. You can deploy an empty page or whatever, just to get it deploying, to get this process rolling. And when you have that in place, you don't even need to think about it. It will just be there. If you do it in the end of the project, well, again, you lose time and effort. So keep it small, keep it simple. Think of MVP. I know it's hard. I usually say I'm going to do small commits, and then you have thousands of files. And you go, oh, what happened? But that's something we can work on, the MVP. Think about what's the MVP. That's a minimal viable product. Break it down to that. So, for instance, a build will just be a simple build. Simple build pipeline for one branch. And then we build upon that.
I'll give you a comment from online.
Yes.
I'll try to paraphrase because there's a few here. One guy who is a experienced Scrum trainer says, I really agree with John here. Agile can't be done on its own. It must be supplemented with strong engineering practices. It'd be helpful if you talked about Scrum has to be done with DevOps, and there's a whole lot of tools that they should be using, such as StyleCop, SonarQube.
Yep.
And you've got to define your standards and then make them part of your build and CI processes. Another guy just talked about the testing, and he said his experience is he cannot get devs to even test the happy path properly. And I can definitely concur with him. And one of the beauties with the videos, the done videos, is before that we would try our best to get early feedback by always sending the product owner a screenshot with what we'd done. So it would bridge the gap. He could check it on his mobile phone, etc. But I tell you what, when you ask them to do a video, they have to, do the video which goes, all right, so I've finished the sales tax feature. Let's go to tools options, add 10%, and go into the order. I'll now add a new order, and it automatically calculates to 10%. You don't know how many times to make that video work, they had to fix it up so it refreshed in the right order, and they thought it was working until they went to do the video, because now they had to record it. And that's why I think it's really gold.
Yep.
And but it's a process-driven test. Yes, and so I may as well mention two things I really got out of tonight, John. I had never really thought of the idea of trying to teach developers to be better testers and get experience from testers. I'm not sure you directly said that point, but you kind of made me think about that. We do know people that are great testers, and we don't try to get them to educate developers to test better.
So just wanted to touch on one of your last slides there about from a grassfields or grassroots project that one of my clients at the end of our project made the comment of he was very concerned at the start that we spend a whole week setting up builds and releases, our DevOps tools and everything. But he thought he'd hold off for a little while before he commented, but he was extremely concerned that we're not delivering anything at all. But then at the second week, he got some value. Third week, value. All the way, I think it was an 8-week project. And he realized that in the past, they would try and push for value from the start.
This is also a problem we face, which I've heard numerous times, that the team want to redo something with the architecture or performance, or we want to change a component or whatever, and we get pushed back saying that there's no functional growth. So we're not going to show them anything. It's about how we show them the value. If we can put a value on that as well, because it's what usually happens is that you just, let's get something that's easy to do and put it in the sprint as well, and we'll show something, and then you work on the whatever, like removing the service layer and do a new architecture or whatever, and they can't see that. I think that, as same as you said, you delivered value that entire week, but maybe we haven't quantified it good enough to say that what we actually do and buy us time to work on those things.
So, not that I picked up on his concern, but I felt that yes, we do actually have to explain what we're doing, because we're not delivering the software, but we're creating a process.
Yeah.
So I had to promise him something, but it wasn't an easy sell, but we did it, and he was extremely happy. And then they're actually now hopefully adopting that with the rest of the teams that they have. But he made a good comment at the end. He was extremely happy how that worked. And he'd love if all these other teams did do that.
So one thing, sorry.
I hope they do it actually.
Yeah.
Sprint zero, yes, that's a nice way of saying it. So.
You can't use that term.
No.
Ken Schwaber doesn't like sprint zero.
There is
it doesn't
no
exist.
No.
There's a long history on that. I think he created sprint zero, and then he took out basically made all these exceptions to a sprint, and then he felt bad about it, and then made a big deal to make sure you don't have sprint zeros. But so we invent our own term here, that before the sprint starts, we construct the backlog, which is essentially doing the spec, mini spec, we call it a spec review, and then building the backlog, and then you're ready to go. But yeah, there is a phase just before the first sprint.
But I would say that I missed one thing with the ceremonies, that is that actually work with the output, put it in the backlog, put value on it. And I would say it's the exact same thing. You don't necessarily do a sprint zero, it's sprint one, because you actually start delivering things. You need the infrastructure to deliver. That's what you're building. And one thing we could do, for instance, collect those success stories, ask the client if you can use their name as a reference, and then we can show this to other clients and say, well, we did this for this person, and here's the reference, and here is what they thought about the value it provided. So we build these success stories, which we can use to get the organization to see that it actually provides the value we're trying to sell. So I think that we need to treat all work we do as stuff that goes into the backlog and it has a value. Otherwise, we do things that necessarily doesn't have a value. Would be a loop if we put in creating the backlog in the backlog. But
a comment from online is developers are going to do invisible type tasks, and it's super important that a product owner needs to be educated on what's happened, especially when the PBI is not visible.
Tangible, I guess.
Well, it's not understandable by them. I can tell you, one of the first, we developed software a long time before we did Scrum, and we used to get feedback from clients all the time. It was always what we'd done wrong and what they weren't happy about. When we did Scrum, and you have a retrospective just like you are doing here, John, and the first step is before we talk about what we've done wrong and what you want fixed, you've got to tell us what you liked. And it was super empowering learning what they liked. I remember in one specific one where we spent a whole lot of time on one of the PBIs to build up kind of a page for the developers to check which services are alive and which ones are not working, which we thought was just for us. And we had to show it as one of the items we'd done. And in the retrospective, when the product owner said one of the highlights of her sprint was seeing one of the pages we had done, and then she started explaining how, hey, I can use this. We have another thing for, I can't remember if it was the SLAs they promised their customers, but she hadn't told us about any of this, and we learnt, just hearing positive things, we would have always assumed that was one of her lowlights, that we had to spend all that time building that.
But I think also one thing we can do is when we do these things that are kind of invisible for the stakeholders, if we want to, for instance, say we have a performance issue, someone said we have to fix this, and you say, why are we fixing it? This is too slow. Then you can just try, well, how much is too slow? And that's the thing we're going to show to the stakeholders. This took 10 times longer before. That means people getting annoyed. We can show them messages from Zendesk or something stating that the system is too slow, to show them what is the actual value of the thing we're fixing. So that is one item that one part we need to address. We had work with an architect, and he just sat there and mumbled and showed stuff, and we're faster now. And you can see the business people just, whoopee. But if we could get them to relate how it would affect their work, so we made this 10 times faster. That means less tickets from your clients. And actually, last week we had 1 ticket instead of 10 tickets. Then they start understanding what we're doing. And this buys us time to do these things. And I think, but this is time consuming, and that's why I'm pushing for these hands-off roles that actually needs to facilitate all of this. Or get the devs more time to spend on these things. That means smaller and fewer PBIs in the sprint probably, or whatever we're doing, sprint or no sprint, or no nothing, or no anything. I think there's always a way to make those transparent things understandable, and if it isn't, then we shouldn't do it, probably. So if we want to re-architect the whole thing, use CQRS instead of service layer, then calculate the cost of ownership. Because someone needs to say it's okay that we do it, otherwise it's probably considered skunk work, I guess. We do it like under the radar. If we're going to do it, we have to have a reason for doing it, and that reason can be quantified. So if we say we want to remove this old architecture, we want to get a new one, maybe means attracting better developers, means lower cost of ownership, do some measuring. We try that. So we estimated 1 work item out of experience in a project, which I did back home. So we inherited a system which was bought. The due diligence was made by someone else. So from experience, we couldn't do anything in less than 2 days. So my colleague did some refactoring on one function, followed basic principles. We estimated a work item to 2 days. I did it in 2 hours, just because he had fixed the code in a way that I could see exactly where I was supposed to change it. He had made tests, which meant I was confident in not introducing any bugs. And we can go back and say, by spending this amount of time, the next work item took 2 hours instead of 16. Of course, there's one point of measure. So we have to do this a couple of times, but that is one way. We need to start saving all these stories, and these are the ones we need to tell the organization, and that buys us time to do the things we like.
And John, I'll give you one more. In the early list you gave there, you gave part of the success, the development team's happiness, which was one thing I'm not sure I ever specifically felt. It's always been important, but you're right, if you don't consider that as a big one, because software generally continues and it's alive, you might have made a certain thing, but letting a team or having a team that doesn't want to continue, most developers stick on with a project even though they're not enjoying it because they want to see it shipped. No developer typically likes waste. They don't want to write all this code and not get it shipped. But if they want to jump ship at that point, it's a big factor in stuff that's not successful. And it's not something I think I specifically thought of when I think of the word success. To me, it's got to get in production.
Anyone want to jump over to what didn't go so well? This is my chance to improve.
Not really about what didn't go so well, but more what's possibly missing.
Yep.
Is there's no mention of scaled agile.
Yep.
And go back to that heuristic that's been around for a long time in software dev, and maybe needs to be updated. But the old metric about software cost for ownership over time is 80% in maintenance and 20% in the dev itself. So I'm not seeing a lot of acknowledgement of that, if you like. So, I guess how do you deliver with ongoing maintenance in mind to minimise the costs of ongoing maintenance?
Yes. It's also one of my big interests, especially being a consultant for many years. We usually come in, deliver, handover. So I worked at Volvo, and there we had different organizations, different budgets for production and maintenance, which meant it became someone else's problem and someone else's budget, and we moved stuff back and forth. And it's quite hard to,
Perhaps the answer to that, placing more value in maintaining technical debt and educating the customer on the value of having a low technical debt.
Yeah. So this is probably going to be like as you all know, but for me is trying not to produce the technical debt. And a lot of for me, this is, one of the reasons I do this is selfish, because I'm in the delivery team and I want to create as good as an environment I can to make a good project. And the reason I think we're not bad coders, the reason we maybe not always do the best code is time issue. So this aims to give us more time to produce good code. And also, it's no fun doing that kind of maintenance we do. Searching for bugs that cannot be reproduced, trying to start application that no one knows how to start, searching through other people's code where you just go, shoot me. So this is part of the background, because I feel that we have to give us the right environment first in order to then start digging into all these practices and address it. But then we have heaps of technical debt. Probably going to go on for all eternity, but we can make it better. Any improvements or any more things that didn't go so well? Adam, you surely have something.
Oh yeah.
So for me, walking away from this, like usually I'd ask a presenter for his slides or something. It was very good being here, but if I walked away from this, like some of the ideas that you were talking about would have been nice if there were some slides that I could go through again. So maybe just fleshing out the presentation with more information that we can refer to later. I know this session's also recorded, but it's slightly a different way of refreshing my memory about what we spoke about.
But you have the real life slide sitting next to you, nagging.
We're not always on the same.
I'll call you. I will call you in the middle of the night.
I think my one is possibly similar. I wanted a list, assuming I'm a junior dev on your team.
Yeah.
I want a list of things that you would like me to do, so that I can double. Because I think I broadly agreed with a lot of what you said, but I'm not sure I could compile them down. I know a lot of it is going to be understanding and common sense potentially, but you need to solidify. You need to be able to tick them off, and because otherwise we're having a long conversation. And I kind of agree with you, but I don't have an action point.
But I think that I both agree and disagree. I think lists as checklists are good. I have them for don't forget exception handling, don't forget logging, don't forget concurrency, whatever. But there's a more principle. If don't hand a paper to a junior and say, this is what you live and die by.
John, I could put error logging and concurrency checks and all these things in my code, and then you can look at it and go, shoot me.
But a list
did everything you asked me.
But a list is only as good as the person who created that list. And if you get handed that and it gets old, I believe that, I'll do a list. But no, I disagree with it, because you should also think and challenge.
I agree with that, the think and the challenge part. But I also really strongly agree with the list. If you take the scenario Adam's painting, which is he's trying to bring a team online, in a new client, and the teams only come together today. There has to be some stuff written down. It doesn't have to be extensive. It can be bullet points, and obviously it's good to have a really good, strong conversation around it. But it's definition of done, and what does good look like, and stuff like that. Some of that stuff needs and bad examples. What's rubbish and what we're not going to be put up, what the team won't put up with.
So one thing I usually do for myself is either it's called a swipe file, but it's more from advertising, or best practices. So I will write down what's worked for me, and then I will try to apply that. And it could also be like the anti-scenarios, like this hasn't worked, so avoid it. But I don't think there is a silver bullet that will. You have to get your own working process, and then you can share some knowledge in between, but it's hard to apply it to every team. So
I completely agree with that. I wasn't thinking of it necessarily as a cross-team artifact, but it's a living document that the team,
So should we agree on best
sort of
practices?
gravitates around, I guess.
Let's call them rules.
No.
Sorry, John, I'd put those last two just in the improvements, not that it didn't go well.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I agree, best practices are proven concepts that are provided value, and it would be beneficial to use them. The thing, I work with a lot of people that they say, oh, this is good, create a template. And then I do a template, and then I can do nothing outside of that template. And I say, the first thing you should do when you use a template is question the template. Is this the right way of doing things? Otherwise, we just follow stuff. So that's why I both agree and disagree that it can be if you know you're completely right, but that's the same with waterfall. If you know absolutely everything, then it works. So, yeah, but anything that will make the process better. And if that's the list of the best practices, yeah, I agree. But question it. Why are we doing this? What's the value? We did a retro in Melbourne. Kind of
You want to look at the other ones?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only thing that didn't go well was the retro. Because we didn't really do it. Could be fun to see the feedback from... So we did it in Brisbane. And they liked the anti-patterns, the self-organization part, my anecdotes that you should invest in the artifacts and activities and the roles, but also more definition of the roles and also more info on no projects. So this started like me digging into no project and then got wider. So I felt that no project is just a part of fixing stuff. And then more guidance on how to adopt, how to fix it. But that's the tricky part, because we don't really know what. And then I wanted more actors that were included in those stereotypes. Yeah, and then the tricky one. So that's the big thing where you have an organization where it's. I think one example was that. So they had the organization in Norway, and they were in Australia, and they got like stuff just handed to them, so they never even got to meet the stakeholders. And that creates a tricky situation, to say the least. And I will continue building on this topic. Please shoot me feedback and fill in the questionnaire before going. And I have some links to some reference material, and I will make the slides available. I will fill in. Shift F5.